Hello students, I am Dr. Poorvi Medatwal, Assistant Professor, Department of Economics, St. Xavier's College, Jaipur. Today we are going to understand the theory of consumer behavior by using indifference curve. The theory of consumer behavior basically deals with how the consumers are going to distribute their limited income according to their budget constraint and their preferences. So in this case, we are going to cover approaches to consumer behavior, certain assumptions, the indifference curves, indifference maps, marginal rate of substitution, and properties of indifference curves. So there are two approaches to consumer behavior. The first approach is known as the cardinal utility approach, which was propounded by Marshall, and it is also known as the Marshallian approach. This approach assumes that the utility can be measured in terms of numbers. The second approach, that is the ordinal utility approach, which was propounded by Hicks and Allen and is also known as the indifference curve analysis, assumes that the utility cannot be measured, but it can only be ranked or ordered. So, coming to the indifference curve analysis, we have certain assumptions. The first assumption is the ordinal utility, that the assumption that assumes that the utility cannot be measured, rather it can be just ranked or ordered in a certain your preference. Second is the assumption of transitivity. Now, the assumption of transitivity says that if suppose a consumer prefers A over B and B over C, then automatically the consumer is going to prefer A over C. The third assumption is the consistency. The assumption of consistency tells us that how the consumer is going to, if the consumer assumes or prefers one good over another at one point of time, then at the other point of time also he is going to be consistent in his choices. Then the assumption of non-satiety, that is always more of a good is better for a consumer. It is more, the consumer prefers more of a good. The next assumption is known as the diminishing marginal rate of substitution. As the consumer substitutes one good over another, so if he so as and when the consumer accumulates more of a good, the rate at which he substitute one good over other keeps on diminishing. Then we come to the indifference curves. The indifference curve is a curve representing the various combinations of market basket that provides the consumer with the same level of satisfaction. So here in this diagram, we can see that the indifference curve between clothing units per week and food units per week are given, and the points A, B and D represents the same level of satisfaction on the indifference curve. Now, the points that are outside the indifference curve, that is G and E, are represents a different level of satisfaction and does not fall on the indifference curve. That is, point E represents more of level of satisfaction, point G represents less level of satisfaction. Then we talk about the indifference map. Now, the indifference map, an indifference map is a set of indifference curve that describes the consumer preferences. So, if we talk about multiple indifference curve in one graph, that is known as an indifference map. Now, here we see that there are three indifference curves are given, U1, U2 and U3, and we can compare these three curves A, D, these 3 points A, B and D on the different indifference curves. So, we can say that higher the indifference curve, higher will be the utility. Next is the marginal rate of substitution. So, marginal rate of substitution, as we discussed just now, that it is the maximum amount of a good that the consumer is willing to give up in order to obtain one more of another good. That is, if in this case, if we give 6 units of clothing, we are going to get 1 unit of food. Similarly, if we here at this point, if we give up 4 units of clothing, we get 1 more unit of food. So that is what is known as the marginal rate of substitution. This marginal rate of substitution keeps on declining since the consumer has more and more units of one good and he gives up less units of other goods. Next comes the properties of indifference curve. The first property it has, according to the diminishing MRS, we have an indifference curve has a negative slope as it slopes downwards. So, with the diminishing MRS, the marginal rate of substitution, the indifference curve has always a negative slope. Because to keep the level of satisfaction remain the same. Second is that indifference curves are always convex to the origin because two commodities are never perfect substitutes or imperfect substitutes. Therefore, the indifference curves are always convex to the origin. The third property is that higher the indifference curve represents, the higher the level of satisfaction, as we discussed in the indifference maps. The last property states that the two indifference curves never never intersect or become tangent to each other. That is, suppose we have a situation here, there are 3 points A, D and B. So, as you can see, the point A and D also are on the same indifference curve, and point A and B are also on the same indifference curve. That means we have a conflicting situation here that represents the level of satisfaction should be, according to this situation, be same on D and B. But D and B are B is on the higher indifference curve. Therefore, according to the last property that we discussed, the level of satisfaction at B should be higher. Therefore, we can say that the two indifference curves never intersect each other. Last, we are going to just discuss what we have discussed in the presentation. We discussed various approaches to consumer behavior. Then we also discussed the assumptions, the indifference curve, indifference maps, the marginal rate of substitution, and the properties of indifference curve. Thank you.